introduce our third speaker, who is David Norris, and he has spent his entire professional career working in MRI and the last 20 years at the Donders Institute. His main research interests are MRI techniques relevant to cognitive neuroimaging and the understanding of brain function. However, we all know him because he is the editor-in-chief of Magma, our beloved journal of the ESMRMB, and I think we all published or tried to publish in it. And he will give us a perspective from a journal point of view on reproducibility. Thank you, David. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'd like to first check that you can see my screen and that you can,
yes,
let's wait a minute, and that you can now see it in presentation mode.
Yes, that works.
Okay, all right. Well, then I'd also like to start by thanking the organizers for the invitation to speak here and for bearing with me as I had a rather bumpy ride to getting to the actual point of presentation. I will look at, I will tell you a bit about Magma and the context of Magma as the journal of ESMRMB. Conflicts of interest regarding this declaration, as I wrote, I have nothing to disclose. I had a brief moment of worry during the opening session because I should, I think, disclose, at least verbally, and I can change the slide afterwards, that I do receive an honorarium from Springer for the time I invest in Magma. I wouldn't want to give people the impression today that I'm some paid lackey of Springer's, but on the other hand, I will show quite a lot of material from Springer because we publish our journal via Springer. And of course, it is the journal of the society, which gives it a little bit of a different status with the publisher than if it would be a journal which the publisher had decided to develop and publish. And we do actually own the journal, but I will just give you some information today on the journal and how it is and how it's developing and how I can see it developing in various ways. So I'll give you a short introduction to Magma, and I will talk a little bit then about what we are, which is a transformative journal, which may be not a concept which is known to everyone here. I will show what the research data policies of Springer are with regard to journals and where we land in that spectrum of research data policies. I'll say a little bit about protocols and then I'll go on to a summary. I realize that we're behind time, and I also realize that some of this may be a little bit dry. So on the one hand, I will try to liven it up a little bit with my own personal views every now and then. And on the other hand, I will try to keep it also relatively short. So Magma, as I said, is owned by ESMRMB, which gives us every few years quite a lot of leverage with the publisher, because theoretically Magma could be published by a different publisher. And in the past, ESMRMB has changed publishers. Not that I'm saying we should be doing this, but of course it does give us a bit of a different status. And Magma policy on open science and most of these things is defined to a large extent by the what Springer Nature offers us, which isn't too bad, as you will see. We are something of a dwarf in the MR publishing in the sense that we publish 72 articles a year in 6 issues, and we have grown in recent years from publishing 60 articles a year, so we have had growth, but we could grow further. We also publish special issues, Being small, we are not actually, let's say, you're not suffering from the pressures of publishing in a high impact factor journal with Magma. We have an impact factor which has oscillated in the past somewhere between 1.5 and just under 3. I am trying to stabilize this. Well, stabilize it and to install a gradual upward trend. Does this mean I am after impact factor at any price? No. So one of the things, when I was appointed to the editor, the MRMB put together a search committee which interrogated me on my goals. And one of the things I said at the time was, I think everything which is to do with MR methods and worthy of publication should stand a chance of being published in Magma. And actually, you can still aim to improve your impact factor and to produce all worthwhile articles without this being a contradiction in terms, because in any journal, including Nature and Science, the impact factor is driven by a minority of the papers. So actually, if you have good quality and you have a small percentage of the papers which are higher citing, your impact factor will go up. As you can see, for a small journal, we get a somewhat more stable impact factor when we look at it over the last 5 years. I can also say it would be great if you would publish in Magma. That's great for us and it's great for you. And as you can see later on, you will also see it can have an effect. Another thing I'd like to point out is we are predominantly a European journal, but we're not exclusively a European journal. So the greatest number of publications, if we like all these data I took from Clarivate, are coming from Germany. When I started as editor, we hardly got any accepted publications from China, but this number has been going up. But we also have quite a high percentage of articles coming from the USA. That's the second largest provider of articles for Magma. And when we go on to discuss transformative journals more, you will realize why that may be a good thing and may not always be such a good thing. So we do special issues. I won't go on about those too much, but we've had a number of very good special issues. Also, I think particularly the biomarkers of renal disease was very nice because it also went some way to try and set standards. And I think standards are very important for getting benchmarks in doing research as well. In this coming year, we have 2 more on imaging of cancer in glioma and prostate. And next year, we're going to have a look at low field and high field MRI, which means for those special issues coming up, which will be published in 2023. Okay, Magma is a transformative journal. Now, a transformative journal is a result of the publishing world dealing with Plan S. So it looks like a hybrid journal, but it has committed to transitioning to fully open access, right? And it's registered with Coalition S as a transformative journal. And once 75% of the articles are published open access, it will go fully open access. And that's a little bit where I have my problem with the USA, because I think there's a cultural difference between the way the US is approaching open access and our colleagues across the Atlantic and Europe. I think Europe is much more militant in looking at open access and encouraging it rather than the US. So if you have a lot of American-based articles, you may find you're struggling to get over that 75% threshold. Transformative journals give you optional open access, so you can also publish in the traditional way. Copyright remains with you. And they are committed to providing greater transparency on the price of the services. When I talked to Springer about this, I said it's all very fair being transparent about the price, but I think what people worry about is the actual profit margin that the publishers are making. To which Springer kind of said, yes, that may be a point. And I think that has indeed been one of the issues people have worried about with commercial publishing. What is a fair profit margin in publishing journals? And the nice thing about being a transformative journal is that for Plan S, you can publish in Magma, which may not be true of all MR journals. And of course, we get all the usual metrics out of this. And many countries, particularly many European countries, have transformative agreements, which means that your institution doesn't necessarily end up paying the rather large publishing fee, which is often associated with open access. If we just look at a small comparison, Transformative is meant to actively promote the take-up of open access and to commit to the growth of open access and to pricing transparency. But the basic, I think the main difference between transformative and hybrid is the 75% threshold, which keeps the transformative journals within Plan S. If we move on now to research data policy, Springer Nature has basically 4 levels, and at the moment, Magma is in the 3rd level. Data sharing encouraged and statements of data availability are required, right? So we are not in the 4th tier. If you go into what type 3 actually means, it means that you have to make data available for any researcher wishing to use them. Journal encourages all data sets to be available. So this is encouraging rather than making it mandatory. And again, there's a rather weak but still pressurizing thing for data archiving in public repositories. And making DOIs of it. Giving a data availability statement, and that is in terms of being able to replicate the findings reported in the article. And if you can't share, stating why not. And these are some examples of data availability statements, which I'm not going to go through, but this is the general standard. Why, if you're not going to make it available, if you are making it available, if it's available on reasonable request, not applicable, and so on. And furthermore, you should cite publicly available data on which conclusions of the paper rely. One thing I think which is also important for peer reviewers, and that I would encourage, because I think there are a lot of reviewers here in general, check manuscripts data availability statements, look at whether they the authors have complied with the journal policy, and don't be shy to ask for data or code if you want to evaluate the manuscript. And I think this is becoming more common, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere near prevalent. I see this as being something which happens occasionally on articles which go over my desk rather than something which is happening frequently. Something which I think is quite nice and which I've noted is happening more often is considering standards of reporting, and particularly community-led standards and protocols. So these are the ones which Springer Nature are actively encouraging people to use. And I think as the community develops, for example, perhaps with fMRI data analysis, we may one day have a gold standard, then these protocols could be included and should be. So, in summary, what I noted when I started talking to Springer about giving this talk and what they thought was the content which was completely in harmony with how Magma is being run, is that they're actually quite sensitive to what the scientific community thinks. So I think it is important to have meetings like this and to really think about how we are doing things and how we want journals to develop. And as a society like ESMRMB, I think it's also very good for the membership of the society to contribute to that debate and to help guide the journal in a direction for the future. And I think if there's more evidence of community support for a lot of these initiatives, it's much easier also to implement them in the journal without the perceived risks. And years ago, at some stage, we advocated going open access for MR journals, and the societies were incredibly cautious because they didn't think the customers, so to speak, the authors were ready for it, and they were worried about long-term damage to the journal. So it's very important to have this interaction. As I said, I'm hoping we get over this 75%, but I'm really kind of worried that this 75% is for many journals quite a high threshold. So I'm not sure that that is going to happen so easily. But of course, the more people who publish open access in Magma, the faster we get over that number. And as we publish a relatively small number of articles, but with a very high turnover rate and expert reviewing, I can only encourage you shamelessly to think of doing this. I think community-led standards of reporting will become more important, are already important, and they certainly are an important way forward, that we look for consensus within our own communities as to how we should do things and try to establish best practices and follow those. So with that, I think we're heading off into a period of discussion, and I'd be happy to take any questions or join in the general debate as we progress.
Thank you very much, Professor Norris. I think that this was a very important talk. I really liked how you highlighted that peer reviewers also shouldn't be shy to ask for data and code. There are a couple of questions, and I think I would like to bring one into the discussion afterwards. But first of all, something that I find very important. Andre Pashoal is asking, is there any policy of discount for countries of low and middle income?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was on one of the slides. I may have gone over routine waivers for authors from low-income countries. There's actually a link which I can put in the chat to answer that if I make sure. Hang on. Oh, there you go. So that should help. And if I think any reasonable request will be met sympathetically. I think we have somebody else who put it in the queue.
Yes, Candace wrote a question, but I would like to bring this question then in the general discussion, because it's about the experience of data available upon request, which is usually bad experience. So people say that, but don't actually do it. So I think it's something nice to discuss with the other parties involved as well. There is also a question by Steven Subron that is kind of a political. What is the added value of having a publisher at all? So cannot just set up a website ourselves and publish the articles ourselves.
Yes, it's a fair point. In my more revolutionary youth, I have suggested to ISMRM that they may consider something like this. I think there is a role probably for publishers. I've had hot debates in our own institution as well about this, where people kind of say, well, the publishers are kind of parasitic entities who are fleecing us. And indeed, my argument was indeed that we must be the dumbest people on the earth because we write the articles, we review for nothing, we review them for nothing, and then we buy them back from the publishers, right? I mean, that's a pretty damning kind of cycle if you look at it like that. But I think if you look at the amount of work involved actually getting an article from submission to publication, the amount of work is not negligible, right? And I've even seen quite experienced scientists who have taken over the editorship of Magma from me while I've gone on holiday and have said afterwards, wow, I didn't realize just how much work was involved in all of this stuff, right? And it is a sort of work which is not always incredibly high level, but you need a good organization for doing it and a professional organization. And if you want to set up a reasonable running journal, you're either going to end up having a lot of academics doing a lot of non-academic things an awful lot of the time just to keep the journal afloat, or you're going to end up essentially running the sorts of services that publishers provide for you. So I think I've come to the view in the longer term that publishers do have a role, but I think there's a question then as to what is the model of profit making for the publisher, right? And there are non-profit publishing organizations like the Institute of Physics in the UK is one I know of. Whether that actually means your journal is published more cheaply with them than with a for-profit publisher is not something I've looked into. It's very difficult to get transparency from publishers historically. So I sympathize with this view, but I wouldn't underestimate the amount of work involved in having a professional journal, including all the handling of papers, potential problems, ethics, marketing, etc., etc. There's a question. Are you moderating? Is that from Sophie? Maybe.
Yeah. Sorry, my mouse was stuck and I couldn't unmute myself for a moment there. I would. We can bring the questions maybe to the open discussion because we are already quite late. I hope. I apologize for this. I hope that we will agree to stay 10 minutes more because it's so interesting. So